Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
There's Syndicate, and welcome to the show. Today, we're going to go through some basic education, some real estate terms, things that you'll hear out there as you're looking at real estate investments. So it's just a little, maybe some boring and dry topics. Will be a short show, and we're going to run through some different terms here and what they mean, but it should give you the groundwork to start considering investing in real estate. So one of the first terms you're going to hear out there is the idea of being an active investor versus a passive investor. And this falls into the other terms of a limited partner or a general partner. So the idea of passive investing is somebody who puts their money into a deal and gets a return. They are only at risk for the money they put in the deal, and they don't do any other work. This is, in legal terms, a limited partner. An active investor or the general partner is typically will also have money in the deal, but they're the ones that are doing the work. They find the deal, they lease the property, they maintain the property, they get investment money back out or dividends out, distributions out to the investors. They communicate with the investors how things are going. So they actually do all the work. This would be, for the example of a strip mall, the person who either built the strip mall and then rented it, or found a strip mall for sale and then took care of all the maintenance of the building, of getting the building rented, getting the tenants in, collecting the money, paying the bills, distributing distributions back out to the investors. So why do they want investors? Usually it's to do bigger deals so they can make more money. You can start small and just use your own money, friends and family money, and do little deals. But often it's as much work to do a big deal as it is to do a little deal. So example again would be if we go back to a strip mall, you could buy a little building with just 2 units in it that's within a price range that an individual person could put down the down payment, get a loan, buy it, and manage it. But the process of getting the inspections done on the building and finding a bank to do the loan and running the building, it really doesn't take a lot more work to run a 10-unit strip mall as it does to run a 2-unit strip mall. But that 10-unit one costs a lot more. So therefore, you need more money down, a bigger down payment, and some more money set aside for things like repairs. So that's where the investors come in. And so the person who wants to buy a little bigger operation will find some investors who put the money in. The general partner or active investor still does all the work, but they share some of the returns with their passive investors. And it's these multiples that come with bigger units that make it all worthwhile. So if you had just 2 units in your strip mall, let's say you make a profit of $10,000 a year off of each of those units. So you do all this work and you make $20,000. On the other side, if you bought 10 units and it makes $10,000 per unit or just 10% more work. So for 10% more work, your operation can make $100,000 instead of $20,000. So as the general partner, decide you want to go down this road. Why would you do this? Well, you go out and you get some investors, and if you split half the profits with your investors, so you make $100,000, the investors get $50,000 and you get $50,000. So for 10% more work now, instead of making $20,000, you make $50,000. So this is the reason why developers, why operators are looking for partners, limited partners, and passive investors. So the next term we'll come to is a syndication, and that's what this whole show is called. A syndication is basically pooling money from numerous investors that will be used to buy a property and execute a business plan. Basically, the definition of a syndication, typically you've probably heard the term used more so in mafia movies, but a syndication is basically a group of people coming together with a common objective. So that's really what's going on here is a group of people are coming together, pooling their money with the common objective of making some money off of this common investment. So with that, you may also call the general partner here, again, different terms you'll hear there, the active investor. The general partner may also be called the sponsor. The passive investors now brings us to another term of being a qualified investor. Now, these are basically terms that come up with government regulations. Qualified investor gets broken down into two different types, either an accredited investor or a sophisticated investor. And you can look these terms up online. But essentially, an accredited investor, the most recent definition, these definitions are basically coming to you here straight from the SEC website. So there are two different criteria for who can be accredited, either financial criteria or professional criteria. For our audience out there of doctors, this is going to be mostly by financial criteria, which is a net worth over $1 million, excluding your primary residence, or an income over $200,000 individually, or $300,000 with a spouse or partner in each of the last 2 years, and reasonably expects to make the same for the current year. The professional criteria involve investment professionals, directors, and officers in investment parties, and are more criteria the SEC uses for being involved in the investment process. And these are the ones that actually would be considered a sophisticated investor. Sophisticated investors are somebody who may not meet the asset criteria, but have experience and skills that say they know how to evaluate what they're investing in. Now, entities, if you choose to hold your investments in an entity, which we don't give investment advice here, but I would recommend you speak with a lawyer who has interest and experience in real estate investments for how to set up your holdings to protect your assets. So asset protection is a whole nother storyline here, and we'll have some expert on another show to go into that in more detail. So moving along in our show on different and spooky terms, two of the bigger terms you're going to hear for how well an investment performs is cash on cash, or COC, and IRR, or internal rate of return. The COC, or cash on cash, is basically the percentage earned on the investment year over year. This is more of a way to evaluate the entire investment, but can also be looked at from an individual standpoint of how much are you making off of your investment every year. The cash on cash does not take into account any proceeds from sale when the property is disposed of or sold. This is just strictly the cash it generates every year after deducting out expenses. The IRR, or internal rate of return, looks at the life of the investment, the percentage returned every year over the life of the investment, taking into account how many years it was held. So it takes into account some of the time value of money. There are different ways to calculate this. So it's a little more complex calculation, but it is a term you'll hear a lot. Third term that you're going to hear a lot is the cap rate, or the capitalization rate. The cap rate is basically the return you would make if you bought the property for full cash. So a 5% cap rate would mean if you bought a building for $100,000, and if it was a 5% cap rate, it would make a 5% return, or $5,000 every year. When you go back and add an expense associated with financing, you get returns that are different from the cap rate. So often, if you're looking at straight cap rate, there are people who look at straight cap rate, and this is usually if somebody's buying fully developed properties that are all set up and running and just looking for a safe place to put their money that generates a return. For those who are looking for higher returns, there's a lot more that goes into the property than the cap rate, but it is a common term used. When we start looking at how we really make money in this business, the next term is value add. Value add is a model of buying a property and adding something to it to make it more valuable so it makes more money. This value is added both to the cash on cash, to the money it generates every month, but also to the final value of the property. And this is called forced appreciation. So forced appreciation, if we look at this like it's your home, we have more understanding of this. Appreciation would be you buy a home, and over the next few years, that home becomes worth more because the market goes up and every home becomes worth more. Forced appreciation would be you buy that home and you remodel it, make it look nicer, and then sell it because now it's a nicer home. That's how you force the appreciation. Now, in commercial real estate, there's a lot more ways to force appreciation. You could find properties that are mismanaged. This results in increased vacancy rates, or that the rent is not up to market. And so you can come in and get the whole place rented or increase the rent. You could do something to increase the rentable space, which could be adding on to a building, adding another building, or if there's property that's being used, could be rented out for something like parking vehicles outside. These are all methods of forced appreciation for commercial real estate. When you get into land deals, there's a lot of other additional ways that the property becomes more, not just for the property itself, but what it can be used for. Part of this is the land entitlement and development process. So if there's a piece of raw land just sitting there that's never had any interest in development, if somebody takes that land and then they go through the process with the city and the county to get it approved for a building, that land is now worth more because somebody else doesn't have to go through that process, which costs time and money. Depending how far it is down that road, whether it's just now been zoned commercial versus agriculture, or it's been fully approved for building an apartment complex with 100 units, or if you got it approved from the same land, approved from an apartment complex with 300 units, is going to be worth more than the one approved for 100 units, because once it's built, it'll generate more income. If it's approved for something that can generate more rent, like an Amazon warehouse, that would be worth even more. Or you may come in the next step in the development. Some people will buy a property that's already entitled because they don't like doing entitlement or they're not good at it. And they will put in the streets and the sewer system, the infrastructure, and then sell it off to people who build buildings on it. So not everybody takes a building the whole way through the development process or the entitlement process. And these are other ways that you can have forced appreciation and make a project worth more. It doesn't always mean owning for a long time and renting. All right, so the final thing we're going to cover today is the deal structure, how the money flows through the deal to the investors, both the limited investors and the active investors. Two types of deal, basically. You can have an equity deal or a debt deal. Debt deal is simpler, like we're used to seeing. That's where the general partner will go out and find investors and just promise them a straight payment. This is a contract just like with the bank. It says, I'm going to pay you a straight 10%. In this case, the debt investor would stand in line right behind the bank. If something goes wrong, who would get the property or receive funds from the property? Typically, these are considered to be safer deals, but may have lower returns than an equity investors where you actually own part of the property. And this is the way most syndications are set up, that the passive investors actually own part of the property. In this deal structure, there are multiple things to look at, and every deal can be set up differently. When you're looking at deal structures, what I'm looking for is the deal structure set up so that everybody wins. And so that the general partner, for them to win, their investors also have to win. So sometimes this will be called the waterfall or how money flows out of the deal. You may see in this a preferred return. Preferred return goes back to our cash on cash or distributions. That's usually a percentage. And what this says is the limited partners get paid this percentage upfront, a preferred return, usually in the 7 to 10% range, before the general partner makes any money. So this is kind of your guaranteed money up front. It's meant to make it act a little bit like a debt investment. And so after, let's say, the general partner pays out the 8%, and then there'll be a profit split. This could be 70-30 or 50-50. Let's just use 50-50 as an example. Then any profits after expenses would be split between the limited partners and the general partner on a 50-50 basis after meeting that 8% hurdle. Sometimes these splits will vary over time and may say, okay, it's limited partners get 8% up front. That's their preferred return. Then it will go to a 50-50 split until the limited investors make, let's say, 17% return. And then after the 17% return, it shifts again and goes to a 70-30 where the general partner gets to keep 70% of the profit. And the idea of a setup like this is that it pushes your general partner to get the limited partners the highest return possible, because the more they push up their limited partner's return, the more their return increases. What are some of the other ways that the general partners make money? Now, this is a hard part for a lot of docs to understand because it seems like somebody's chipping away at your money. And these are the fees that are charged. Now, fees aren't necessarily a bad thing. When you're working with good general partners, good sponsors, this is how they feed their family, and this is how they make your money. And you want to work with people who are making money for themselves too. That means they're good at it and they keep doing it. You got to look at how much money you're going to make and not get hung up on how much they keep, because I see this a lot with docs, like, oh, they somehow seem to think that taking some fees is a bad thing. But this is really the smaller money that flows out of the deal early on that allows them to buy groceries and pay their mortgage and pay their employees, a secretary back at the office, the janitor who's cleaning it. That's where a lot of these fees are going. So these may be an acquisition fee, a fee that they earn at the purchase of the building or the property. This is typically like 1% to 5%, usually, like 2%. So it's not a giant fee. And then there will be an asset management fee or a property management fee. These are different. The asset management fee typically goes more into the money required to manage the money, the accountants, the lawyers, those types of things. Where the property management fee is more the person managing the actual property. This is the one who makes sure that the grass is mowed, the toilets are fixed, the lot is plowed, and these types of things. Now, when you look at the type of lease, if you're doing apartment investing, you're going to see a lot more property management fees and asset management fees because there's a lot more that goes into it. But when you start looking at commercial properties that are leased to businesses, there's a variety of different leases out there. You hear a lot about a triple net lease. The triple net lease, simply said, is basically the tenant pays rent and they take care of everything else as if they own the building. Within commercial leases, there's all kinds of variations, and that can be part of the balancing getting the building rented versus not rented and how much rent you collect. And this is really the art of non-multifamily commercial investing, is how your leases are set up. But that just kind of changes the whole structure there and the returns, and not necessarily that any of them are good or bad things. A refinancing fee. Often if a building is refinanced, that's something that often will then at the end of the life of the investment. So if an investment was set up to run for 5 years and then the investors get their money, their full money back, one thing that may be done is they may just refinance the property. So they take out a new loan, pay all the investors back their money, and maybe take on a new set of investors again. Now, this has to be looked at different if this was part of the plan versus, as we're going to see in the next few years, we're going to see some distressed refinancing. When people took out adjustable mortgages or shorter term loans, thinking that rates would stay low and they're looking at a much higher rate. When this happens and the refinancing is under duress, this kind of changes from your standard refinancing fee. And we're going to have some people on here over the next few months. They're going to talk a lot about this topic and how to benefit from a distressed real estate market. Another fee you may see is a guarantee fee. This is more in the multifamily world. Often we look at non-multifamily loans, pretty much the general partner's on the hook. They're guaranteeing that loan. So they're personally standing behind it, and that's required by the bank. A lot of the multifamily loans that are backed by the government don't have a personal guarantee. So your general partner is not on the hook like they are in a commercial property. Depending on the size of the loan and the quality of the operator, though, sometimes the bank wants a guarantee. And that guarantee fee could be the guarantor, maybe somebody who comes in to just guarantee the loan. So this is somebody who's usually an experienced operator themselves. Maybe they're retired. They've got a large net worth. And to get the deal done, somebody's got to come in and say, I'm going to back this thing up. I'm going to charge 1 or 2% to guarantee the loan. So they take all the risk, but they don't really do any work. And so that's why these are typically are people who are very experienced. So they can look at the deal and decide whether they think there's risk to it or not when they guarantee that loan. Okay, so for the final part of this podcast, I'm just going to go into the life cycle of an investment. Most investments today aren't under a long-term hold structure. A lot of this comes into depreciation, and accelerated depreciation is why when you buy a new property, you can do some different things with the depreciation that allow you to write off more upfront. That increases the return to investors. And that's why a lot of deals will go on like a 5-year cycle, that it's not held for the long term. That cycle can also be used to decrease risk because you don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now. A shorter time frame is less risk because it's more predictable. So in that case, you'd say, I'm going to go in and I'm going to buy a property and I'm going to hold it for 3 to 5 years rather than 20. And then we'll sell it and we're going to take that money and then reevaluate the market and decide what would be good to be investing in next. So that's the life cycle. And this goes back to some of the early terms like IRR, which take into account how long the property was held to make that money. If it was a quick turnaround, like a land entitlement deal, the property is going to be purchased and then moved quickly through the entitlement process and sold to a developer. Could be as short as a year, possibly less. There's some additional things that we'll talk about on some other shows that go into that decision versus a multi-year hold, or it could be a very long-term hold, depending on how it's set up. The length of the hold is part of the evaluation of whether you want to go into this deal. Part of that is also looking at the debt structure. And it's a good question to ask about how long are the interest rates they have good for? Are they locked for 1 year, for 3 years, for 5 years, for 10 years? Because typically what happens is you get better rates with shorter lock times, which increases your return to your investors. But it also adds a degree of risk, as we're seeing right now in a rising interest rate market, that if interest rates go up a bunch, your cost of holding the property goes up and it may turn what was a good deal into a bad deal. And so there's a quick review of commercial real estate terms. I hope you enjoyed the show. If there's any specific questions you have, please reach out, put them in the comments. We'll try and get those questions answered on another show, or I'll reach out to you personally. Thank you. This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.